thank you for being here and showing such interest. I want to start off by saying first and foremost, I thank Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger for the opportunity for this appointment, for this nomination, and the shock and awe of it hasn't quite really worn off. And I also thank the Commission for the affirmative votes confirming me a few minutes ago. To stand before that distinguished panel was a historic moment for me, and to have my family there, my mother and my 2 children, and my husband and my in-laws, was truly a very personal, historic, wonderful moment. And so I'll take questions.
Justice, do you plan to meet with the alliance of judges around the state who have some concerns about the administration of justice and the centralization of power?
After November 2nd, if I get elected, and hopefully I do, I plan on listening to many voices and talking to folks about what is bothering them or what they think, they think improvements are. I think one of the hallmarks, I believe, of my 20 years is I really want to listen. I want to know what's on your mind, and if we get to a point where we're repeating ourselves, I gently remind you of that because I am listening very carefully. But I'd like to hear from all the voices.
Will you specifically meet with the Alliance of California Judges?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about shattering so many black feelings and barriers with your nomination?
Yes. I have never really looked at it as shattering glass ceilings. I really look at it as, my mother told me a long time ago, no matter what it is, if you can get your foot in the door, that's all you need, and then do your best. And I have to say I've done that, but I didn't get my foot in the door alone. I really had the assistance of what I consider really tremendous mentors who gave me an opportunity. And I will tell you one person who comes to mind whenever I mention that, and that is Justice Vance Ray. I mean, when he was hiring for an assistant legal affairs deputy for then Governor George Duke-Majan, it was a much coveted position, and many, many people applied, and he gave me that opportunity, even though I didn't necessarily have the legislative background, but he gave me an opportunity in that office.
At the hearing, you talked about perspective, Justice Sakauye. How do you think this perspective as a Filipino-American, as an Asian American, will come to play in your decisions in the case law that you talked about a while back?
Well, in all of my cases as a jurist, the first and foremost issue for me is what rule of law are we in? What does the rule of law say? In terms of my personal experiences, I have to say, either as a woman or as a Filipina or as a mother or as a 50-year-old woman in this society, that always influences how I see the facts. That always has an influence on how I interpret the facts and understand the facts to be. But in terms of the rule of law, I apply the rule of law based on precedent and stare decisis.
Chief Justice George said to some of us upon his announcement of his retirement that, for better or worse, the same-sex marriage case was going to end up being what he was remembered most for. That's not likely to come before your court, I wouldn't think again. I wonder what your thoughts are on that case and that whole issue in California.
Well, you may be correct that that same case won't come before the Supreme Court, but I have no doubt that permutations thereof will. I mean, what my experience 20 years on the bench has been thus far, that no issue, well, every issue has a tail or has an end or has a thread that will come back, and it comes back in unforeseeable ways. So I'm not comfortable commenting because I don't want to prejudge it, but because I think there are always permutations of every issue that comes back to the court, or could come back. And I would really want to be able to hear the case and address it with an open mind without anyone thinking I've prejudged it.
Are you going to campaign in any way coming up to November, raise any money, or are you going to kind of let the process?
That's a good question, and since it's only really about 20 minutes after my COHA hearing, I don't know yet. I don't know. I haven't figured that part out yet, since I've really tried to take this major event one step at a time.
You're on the verge of being the second female Chief Justice of California. Any reflections on the first one? Her name doesn't get mentioned much at hearings like this, but you were around during the events.
I was around. I think I was a first-year prosecutor, so I have to say I was here, but I wasn't present. I mean, I can tell you I was just new and getting my feet under the ground, and so I was aware of it. The circumstance, well, I wasn't even aware of the circumstance. I was aware there was a recall. I was a young prosecutor, and at that time, really, unfortunately, more important to me was the defendant guilty of a DUI. So I can't really speak to Justice Rosebird's tenure on this court or what happened in the retention election.
If the budget deal falls through, will you support statewide court closures?
If the state budget falls through, then that's a matter for the Judicial Council to consider. That's the matter for the AOC lobbyists and CJA to find out what we can cobble together, where we go from here, learning historically what court closure caused last year. But that's not a unilateral decision. It wasn't then, it isn't now, it wouldn't be for me to make.
What would be the biggest challenge you think you might have as Chief Justice?
The biggest challenge as
If ever.
Justice. Well, I think the magnitude of the role, which is something I had alluded to earlier. I mean, I think the chief has many responsibilities, and none of us really know. And the only people who know are the chief and his wife. They're the only people who really know. I mean, we look in each other's lives and we say, well, you're busy, you're a mother, you're a father. But no one really knows exactly how busy you are until they walk your shoes. So my challenge is going to be exactly knowing what he does and how he does it, and doing it the best I can.
And Chief Justice actually stressed the magnitude of those administrative responsibilities. What do you think will be your priority issue to address that may impact minority communities, the Filipino community?
Well, I think in terms of the administrative side, the aspect that will most affect the community, whether it's a minority community or not, the public period will be public access to the courts. In times of difficult budget climate, the question always becomes access to justice, because courts are a place of last resort. It's where people come to resolve issues. And so that's going to be a paramount issue probably for the next couple of years.
You mentioned the importance of learning from the people who came before you, but I'm curious to know how you think you'll be different, how you'll sort of differentiate yourself as the chief.
From
the leaders, the predecessors, the people that you said you're going to for learning from, for guidance. But I'm curious as to how you will distinguish yourself.
I think I distinguish myself well, I can't say that I distinguish myself. I have to tell you that I bring my own style. Many years ago, I realized I can only bring my style, and it's a matter of you getting used to me and me getting used to you. I bring sort of an all-inclusive, I like to hear what the pros and cons are. I don't come with an agenda. I don't come with preconceived notions. I really need to hear. I like to go to the experts. I like to know what and why. I like to fully know the facts before I make a decision. And so in that way, I am probably all-inclusive and pretty collaborative, but I like to get to a decision. I like to get to a decision.
Will you continue to do your DCA caseload until New Year's Eve, or what's going on with that?
You must have an ear over at my court, because that's an interesting question. And you know, right now, we're down a few justices until they fill the vacancies, and it's business as usual for me. I'm taking cases, and I enjoy the cases. I enjoy the issues, and at some point, of course, I would probably taper off, but that hasn't happened yet.
What kind of advice did Gloria, Ochoa, one of your earliest role models, give you, if any?
You know, the advice that Gloria Ochoa gave me was what I had alluded to in my comments to the commission, and that is, she was an indirect leader for me. I saw her, I didn't know her, she probably had no cause to talk to a young teenager, but it planted in my head that this woman had major approval from my mother. And my mother had always had best interest about getting an education and doing the best we can. And all I knew was this is the first time ever my mother had spoke to me in a fashion to look at someone else to gain some kind of lesson.
What about Chief Justice George? Has he given you any specific words of wisdom that you want to share?
Not yet, but I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it. We haven't had those. We haven't had a sit down. We haven't had anything. I've asked him, he's very busy today, about some time, and he's very generous, but I'm kind of waiting. I thought it would be presumptuous of me to ask for anything until after the COPA hearing.
What have your children said about becoming Chief Justice?
You know, my children were born into the family when I was already a judge. And so they've sort of grown up around courtrooms and jury boxes and holding tanks. And so for them, I'm not sure they grasp the magnitude. I have a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old, and basically they want to go to the mall.
We have time for one more question, everybody.
Well, this chief has said that one of the biggest problems they face is that the state faces, the judicial system faces, is a dysfunctional death penalty system. I wondered if you've had any thoughts about that issue. You've not faced any capital cases since becoming in the DCA, and I wonder if you had any thoughts about that problem in that situation that you're sharing.
As of late, I have thought about that problem because I reviewed Professor Uleman's report, and I looked at the input of many of the distinguished members of that commission, including the Attorney General Brown, as well as the statistics on the backload and of the death penalty cases on the Supreme Court. And I tell you that there are what I take away from that report, which is 2 years old, is lots of talented people are willing to put in the work to solve the problem. And what I also think is the first issue, they identified 5 causes of delay, and the first being the appointment of counsel to these cases, and then the delay in getting a certification of record, and then the delay in actually hearing a fully briefed appeal of death penalty issue. And I tell you that I perceive that kind of backlog really causes a great strain on the court to do its regular work, the work it's supposed to do in terms of resolving conflict among the appellate courts. It's a major issue. I look forward to delving into it. I look forward to working with those people who have experience in that area. And I would also point out that that report by Professor Uleman talked about sort of a collaborative approach again. It's going to take legislative fixes, it's going to take a budget fix, so that we can have access to justice for those cases.
Its basic conclusion, though, was it needs more money.
Yes, but you know what? It needs more money, but I don't think monetary answers are the only answer. I think there are some non-monetary answers in there as well.
Such as?
Well, I don't want to go into detail, but there are reports in there about training lawyers, or also maybe shifting of resources that may not have a financial impact. I'm not the expert, but I'd like to hear from the experts.
Thank you, Madam Justice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.